The city lights always seemed brighter at night, but to Sana, they often looked distant, almost like stars she could never touch. She was 42, a mother of two, and a woman who had spent most of her life running from one responsibility to another. Between her job at a small private school and the endless cycle of home chores, Sana had forgotten what peace even felt like. Every morning, she woke up before the sun, packed lunch for her children, prepared breakfast for her husband, and hurried through traffic just to reach work on time. Her life was ordinary, maybe even too ordinary, until the day everything changed. It started with headaches. Not the normal kind. These were different, heavy, pulsing, and unbearable. At first, she thought it was stress. She told herself it would pass. She took painkillers, drank tea, and ignored the signs. But as days turned into weeks, the pain grew stronger. Sometimes, she would forget words mid-sentence. Sometimes, she would lose her balance while walking. One afternoon, while teaching her class, she suddenly felt dizzy, her vision blurred, her knees went weak, and she collapsed in front of her students. When she opened her eyes, she was in a hospital bed. The white walls, the smell of antiseptic, the steady beep of machines, everything felt strange and distant. Her husband, Farhan, sat beside her, eyes red and worried. "You scared me, Sana," he said softly, trying to smile but failing. The doctor entered the room, holding her reports. His expression was serious. Sana's heart started racing even before he spoke. "Mrs. Sana," he began carefully, "we found a growth in your brain. It's a tumor. We'll need more tests to understand its type, but it's pressing against nerves. That's why you've been feeling the pain and dizziness." Sana felt the words hit her like a wave she wasn't ready for. A tumor in her brain. Her mind went blank. For a few seconds, she couldn't breathe. She tried to ask something but her lips trembled. Farhan squeezed her hand tightly. "It's okay," he whispered, though his voice shook. That night, as she lay in the hospital bed, she looked out the window at the city lights. Everything looked so normal. Cars passing, people walking, laughter somewhere in the distance, but inside her, everything was falling apart. The next few days were filled with tests, scans, and long waiting hours. Every moment felt heavy with fear. Her children visited, confused and scared. Her daughter Aisha asked, "Mama, are you sick?" Sana forced a smile and said, "Just a little, Beta, I'll be fine soon." But deep down, she wasn't sure if she was lying. When the results finally came, the doctor explained that the tumor was not cancerous, but it was large enough to cause serious problems. Surgery was necessary. "There's risk," the doctor said, "but you have a good chance of recovery." Sana nodded quietly. That night, when everyone had left, she cried silently. Not because she was afraid to die, but because she realized how much she had taken life for granted. She had spent years worrying about bills, cooking, deadlines, and other small things, yet never paused to simply live. In those quiet hours, something inside her changed. She promised herself that if she survived, she would never live half-heartedly again. She would love deeply, forgive easily, and notice the beauty in ordinary days. Surgery day came faster than she expected. She was wheeled into the operation theater, heart pounding, hands shaking. Farhan kissed her forehead and whispered, "You're strong, I'll be right here when you wake up." Under the bright surgical lights, as the anesthesia took effect, she whispered one last prayer, God, please give me another chance to live and to live right." When she opened her eyes again, everything was blurry. She could hear voices, faint but familiar. "She's waking up," someone said. It was Farhan's voice. She blinked slowly and saw his face through tears. "You did it," he said softly. "You're okay." The doctor later told her the surgery was successful, though recovery would take time. Sana smiled weakly, tears rolling down her cheeks. She was alive, and it was enough. Days turned into weeks of slow healing. She couldn't walk properly at first. Her speech was slow, but every small step felt like a miracle. She would sit by the window every morning, watching the sunrise with tears in her eyes. For the first time in years, she noticed the sound of birds, the smell of rain, and the softness of her children's laughter. She realized how much beauty had always been around her. She had just been too busy to see it. Her illness became her greatest teacher. She learned that health is not something to take for granted. She learned that time, once lost, never comes back. And she learned that love, real love, shows itself most when life gets hardest. Farhan stayed by her side every single day, feeding her, helping her walk, even combing her hair when she couldn't lift her arm. She often looked at him and thought, this is what love means, standing beside someone when they're at their weakest. Sana's recovery took months. Some days she felt strong, other days she broke down, but she kept going. The tumor had left her scarred, both physically and emotionally, but it also gave her something precious: clarity. She no longer cared about gossip, status, or what others thought. She wanted to live simply, kindly, and meaningfully. She returned to teaching after almost a year. The first day she entered her classroom, her students clapped for her. She smiled with tears in her eyes. She began her class not with a lesson from a textbook, but with a lesson from life. Children, she said softly, life is not about being perfect. It's about being thankful. Don't wait for something bad to happen before you start valuing what you already have. The room went silent. Even the smallest children listened with wide eyes. That day, Sana felt truly alive. Here's part 2 of your story, continuing from where we left off. I'll carry it forward in the same smooth, emotional, simple style. After this, I'll continue to part 3 until we reach around 4,000 words total. The months that followed were quiet but full of meaning. Sana's life slowed down, yet it felt more beautiful than ever. She no longer rushed to beat traffic, no longer argued over small things, no longer filled her days with noise. Instead, she began every morning with gratitude. She would stand on her balcony with a cup of tea, looking at the rising sun between the tall buildings, and whisper to herself, I'm still here. Thank you, God. Her children noticed the change. Aisha often said, Mama, you smile more now. Sana would laugh softly and reply, because I finally learned what peace feels like. She started to talk to her students about hope, patience, and resilience. Her classes became more than lessons, they became small conversations about life. The children loved her more than ever because she spoke to their hearts, not just their minds. But it wasn't always easy. Some nights, she would still wake up afraid. She worried the tumor might return. Every small headache made her anxious. But then she would remind herself, fear can't stop me from living. She began keeping a diary, writing one good thing about each day. Sometimes it was as small as I made my son laugh, or the sky looked beautiful today. Slowly, her heart healed. One afternoon, her school invited her to speak at a parents' event. At first, she hesitated, she had never been a confident speaker. But her principal insisted, Sana, your story can inspire so many. So she agreed. On the day of the event, she stood before a hall full of parents and students, her hands trembling slightly. The microphone felt cold in her hand. She took a deep breath and began to speak. 2 years ago, she said, I thought my life was over. I had a brain tumor. I couldn't walk, couldn't speak properly, and I was afraid I'd never see another sunrise. But I'm standing here today, alive, thankful, and stronger than I ever was. I learned that pain changes you, But it doesn't have to break you. It can make you wiser. It can open your eyes to what really matters. The hall was silent. Some parents had tears in their eyes. Sana continued, her voice steadier now. We spend our lives chasing things: money, comfort, status. But when you're lying in a hospital bed not knowing if you'll live to see tomorrow, none of those things matter. The only things that stay are love, kindness, and faith. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. People stood, clapping with emotion. Her husband, sitting in the front row, had tears in his eyes. Her children beamed with pride. That day changed everything. People began inviting her to share her story in other schools, in hospitals, and even on local talk shows. Sana never imagined that her pain would become someone else's hope. As months passed, she started a small online group for people battling serious illnesses. Every week, she would post encouraging messages, share her journey, and listen to others share theirs. Healing starts when you believe you can, she would write. Soon, hundreds of people joined. Many said her words helped them keep going. One woman messaged her saying, "I was afraid to start my treatment, but your story gave me courage. I'm fighting now." Sana cried reading that. She realized that sometimes, God gives you pain not as punishment, but as purpose. Her health slowly improved. She learned to meditate, to take care of her diet, and to live mindfully. She would often tell her students, "Your mind is your greatest power. Protect it, feed it with good thoughts, and never stop learning." Her students started calling her the teacher with the sunshine smile. But the biggest change was within her family. Before her illness, she and Farhan had drifted apart. Busy schedules, arguments, silence between meals. But after everything, they found love again, deeper and softer. They began to talk more, laugh more, and spend quiet evenings watching sunsets together. Farhan would often say, "I almost lost you once. Now, I don't want to lose a single moment." Sana learned to say no to things that didn't bring her peace. She stopped worrying about what people thought and started focusing on what truly mattered: her health, her family, and her purpose. Sometimes, she would look at her scar in the mirror, a thin line across her scalp, and smile. It was no longer a mark of pain, it was a reminder that she had survived. One evening, as she walked home after work, she saw a little girl sitting by the hospital gate, crying. She stopped and asked, "What's wrong, Beta?" The girl said, "My mom is sick. She has a tumor." Sana knelt beside her, hugged her gently, and whispered, "I had one too, and I got better. Your mama will too." The girl looked up in surprise. "Really?" Sana smiled. "Yes, really. Don't lose hope." The girl wiped her tears and smiled for the first time. That night, Sana thought about how one small act of kindness could give someone courage. She realized she didn't need to change the whole world, she just needed to bring light wherever she could. The next day, she decided to write a book, not a fancy one, but a simple one, filled with her thoughts, struggles, and lessons. She titled it The Second Sunrise. It wasn't about disease or suffering, it was about rebirth, hope, and gratitude. She wrote in it every night after dinner, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling. Months passed as Sana poured her heart into her writing. The book became her mirror. Each page carried her pain, her healing, and her gratitude. She wrote about how every breath feels different when you've once feared losing it. She wrote about the beauty of slow mornings, the strength in vulnerability, and the quiet power of faith. She didn't know if anyone would ever read it, but that didn't matter. Writing itself became her therapy, her way of breathing again. When she finally finished, she printed a few copies with her savings and gave them to her school library and to a small bookstore nearby. She didn't expect much. But within weeks, people started asking for it. Some even came to meet her in person, saying her words had touched their hearts. One man told her that after reading her story, he went back to his wife, who was battling cancer, and promised to stand by her no matter what. Another woman said she had stopped taking her life for granted and started spending time with her children again. Sana felt humbled. She realized that sometimes, your scars become someone else's map to healing. What had once broken her was now helping others rebuild. One day, a local news channel contacted her. They wanted to interview her for their segment on inspirational people. She felt nervous but agreed. On the day of the interview, as the camera lights came on, she sat calmly, her eyes gentle but full of strength. The interviewer asked, "Sana, what kept you going through such a hard time?" She smiled and replied, "Hope and love. When life took everything away, hope whispered that it wasn't the end, and love from my family, from strangers, from God gave me strength to believe again. I realized life doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful, it just has to be real." Her words touched thousands who watched that interview. Messages began flooding in from all over, people thanking her, sharing their own struggles, telling her how her journey gave them courage. Sana read every message with tears of gratitude, but what moved her the most was when her daughter Aisha came to her one evening and said, "Mama, when I grow up, I want to help people like you do." Sana hugged her tightly. "You already do," she whispered. "Every time you smile at someone who's hurting, you're helping." Her life, once ordinary, had become extraordinary not because of fame or success, but because she found purpose in her pain. She continued teaching, continued guiding students not only in academics but in life. Whenever her students felt hopeless, she would tell them, "If your heart is still beating, it means your story isn't over yet." A few years later, her health had stabilized completely. The doctors called it a recovery beyond expectation. Her scans showed no sign of the tumor returning. When she heard the news, she didn't cry out of relief. She smiled quietly, placed her hand over her heart, and whispered, "Thank you." That evening, she walked to the same park she used to pass every day on her way to work but never had time to stop and see. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She sat on a bench, feeling the soft breeze on her face. Around her, the city was alive, children playing, couples laughing, birds returning to their nests. Everything looked new, even though it had always been there. She thought of how life had changed, how she had changed. The woman who once lived in hurry now found peace in stillness. The woman who once feared death now celebrated life every single day. She realized that the tumor, as terrifying as it was, had been a turning point. It had stripped away all the unnecessary layers of her existence and showed her what truly mattered: love, kindness, faith, and gratitude. A small boy selling flowers approached her and said, "Auntie, buy one?" She smiled and bought a single rose. He grinned, thanked her, and ran off. Sana held the rose close, looking at its fragile beauty. Life is just like this, she thought, delicate, short, but precious. As darkness settled, she stood up, took a deep breath, and walked home slowly. Every step felt like a blessing. She no longer measured her life in years or achievements, but in moments: the laughter of her children, the kindness of strangers, the taste of morning tea, the sound of rain against her window. A few months later, her book The Second Sunrise was officially published by a small publisher who had read it and loved it. It sold widely, especially among people facing illness or loss. She began to receive invitations to speak at schools, hospitals, and conferences. Each time, she stood in front of new faces and shared her truth, not as someone who suffered, but as someone who survived with purpose. In one such talk at a medical college, a young doctor asked, "What is the biggest lesson your illness taught you?" Sana paused, smiled, and said, "That every heartbeat is a gift. We keep waiting for big miracles, But the real miracle is waking up every day, being able to smile, to walk, to love, to breathe. Don't wait for pain to teach you gratitude. Learn it now. The audience clapped for a long time, but Sana wasn't thinking about applause. She was thinking about how far she had come from a frightened woman lying in a hospital bed to someone who could give hope to others. At home, her family celebrated her small victories. On quiet nights, she would still write in her diary only now. Her entries were filled with joy. Today I helped someone smile. Today I didn't rush. Today I felt peaceful. Life had become simple again, and that simplicity was her greatest joy. One evening, she found an old photograph of herself from the time before her illness. Tired eyes, forced smile, busy hands. She looked at it for a long time and whispered to her old self, "You did well, but you forgot to live. Don't worry, I'm living for both of us now." Years later, when people spoke about her, they didn't just mention her tumor or her suffering, they spoke about her light, her calmness, her words that healed others. She became a symbol of hope, proof that even when life breaks you, you can rebuild yourself with more strength and grace than before. On her 51st birthday, her family surprised her with a small party on the rooftop. As candles flickered in the gentle wind, her son said, "Mama, make a wish." She closed her eyes for a moment and smiled. "I don't need to wish for anything," she said softly. "I already have everything that matters." They laughed, sang, and watched the stars together. Later that night, as she stood by the railing, looking at the glittering city lights, she whispered, "I used to see these lights and feel far from them, but now, I feel like I'm shining with them." She knew her journey wasn't about surviving an illness, it was about rediscovering life. Her story wasn't one of tragedy, but of transformation. She understood now that pain, when faced with courage, doesn't destroy you, it shapes you. It makes you gentler, wiser, and more alive than ever. And so, Sana continued living, teaching, helping, loving, not because she feared death, but because she finally understood the beauty of being alive. Every morning she woke with a heart full of gratitude and a quiet smile, ready to embrace whatever the day brought, because for her, every sunrise truly was a second chance.